Welcome all to Smart Cities post-COVID-19. This is being run as part of London Tech Week and is being organised by Tech London Advocates, the Smart Cities group. I wanted to take a couple of minutes, just I think a few people are still signing up. So if you don't mind, if we just hold on for 30 seconds and then we'll kick off. I can see a lot of numbers jumping up. Okay, I think we're good to go. So welcome all. As I said, Smart Cities post-COVID-19. This is trying to take a practical perspective on what's changed for Smart Cities post-COVID and trying to bring in real-life use cases. We have an amazing panel to bring different perspectives to this conversation, and we'll introduce them shortly. I'll introduce myself first. My name is Sandeep Arora. I'll be the moderator today. I run Aurora Digital, which is a international market entry launchpad for tech companies coming to the UK and Europe. I also co-chair Tech London Advocate Smart Cities with Larissa, who's on the panel today. And I know she wants to talk a bit about that and people who may want to join that group as well. So the idea really is the panel will be taking certain questions on areas of expertise and experience that they've seen over the last few months. And there will be an opportunity for people to ask questions through the webinar panel as well. So please take advantage of that as we go through the conversation. We will go through topic by topic. So if there is something that jumps out to you that you don't think is being addressed, please use that opportunity. And as I said, we have an amazing panel to hopefully answer those questions for you. So without further ado, I'm going to start to introduce short introductions to everyone. We'll kick off with Larissa, who's the co-chair of the Smart Cities London Tech Advocates Group and also a associate professor at UCL. Larissa, if you want to just say a few words about yourself.
Can you guys hear me now?
We can, yeah.
Yes. Good. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having me here. So as Sandeep said, I am the co-chair of the Smart London, the Tech London Advocates Smart Cities Group. And I would encourage everyone listening to this webinar to sign up to join the group. So you can feel free to contact Sandeep and myself. So the contact is on the webpage of the event that you received via email. And as an introduction, I am an honorary associate professor at UCL in computer science. I'm also the AI data management and smart analytics practice lead at Google. And I'm a computer scientist by training. And I will be here covering topics of like AI and smart cities and how that can shape the world around us. Thank you very much.
Amazing, and we'll hear from you later as well, Larissa, so thank you for that. Next we have Jeremy, Director of Intelligence Unit at GLA, the Greater London Council. Jeremy, if you don't mind saying a few words.
That's okay, thank you, Sandy. Yes, it's Greater London Authority, City Hall in London. We support the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. And the City Intelligence Unit comprises a number of professionals, economists, statisticians, data scientists and others who will support the research and analysis into the future of the city. And of course, more recently, we have been thinking about the longer term recovery of the city, which is particularly relevant to this discussion. Thank you.
Amazing, thank you very much. Next, I'd like to introduce Sarah, who's a partner and UK Head of Future Mobility at KPMG. Sarah, if you'd say a few words.
Yes, happy to. Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Owen Vandersloot. As Sandeep mentioned, I'm a partner with KPMG. I lead our infrastructure strategy business and also our future mobility practice. So that's working with public and private sector organizations around some of the challenges, both from a policy, strategy, data and technology point of view, particularly with a focus on future mobility.
Brilliant, wonderful. Thanks for that, Sarah. Yuandi, if you wouldn't mind saying a few words. Yuandi is Innovation Lead at Lang O'Rourke. Yuandi,
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sandeep. I'm really excited about this session, so it's a real honor to be here. Just as Sandeep said, I am innovation lead at Langer Rook. My work is very much around modern methods of construction, and as such, embedded technologies is part of that conversation, and also part of the evolution of how we deliver smart buildings in this country and in other parts of the world.
Brilliant and very topical. We'll be talking about that a bit later. Thank you for that. David, if you don't mind saying a few words. David is the Innovation Lead for Cities and Mobility at Innovate UK. David, if you don't mind introducing yourself.
Sure. Thanks for having me and very pleased to be here. I am indeed the Innovation Lead for Cities and Mobility at Innovate UK. That means I oversee our urban mobility portfolio, which manages several dozen projects that Innovate has invested in. Innovate UK, for those who are not aware of it, is the government's innovation agency, and we provide funding and financing for innovative companies and solutions that tackle the key problems that have been identified by the government's industrial strategy. So very happy to be here.
Brilliant, wonderful, thank you for that. Next we have Yelena. I don't know if we've got her on video, but I believe we do have her on audio. Yelena is a solution architect at Connected Places Catapult. Yelena, if you don't mind saying a few words about yourself and the Catapult, that would be very helpful.
Sure. Hi, everyone. And I do apologize for my camera not being on. I've had some issues connecting with the GoToWebinar. Connected Places Catapult is a neutral non-profit organization which is aimed at growing UK businesses and innovation, specifically in a placemaking context. So we accelerate urban innovation and smart mobility for connected places of tomorrow. We work very closely with David at Innovate UK. My particular role is within the applied data and technology area, which looks at strategy and appropriate development of technology and uses of data to solve urban challenges.
Perfect, wonderful. Thanks for that, Yelena. And last but certainly not least, we have Paul, who's the Chief Digital Officer at North of Tyne Combined. Paul, if you can give a bit of an explanation of that, would be very helpful. Paul, we can't hear you. Your mic must be off, yes?
Yes, so I am the Chief Digital Officer at the North of.
Yeah.
Is that working?
That's better, yeah. Cool.
So I am Paul Armstrong. I'm the Chief Digital Officer at the North of Tyne Combined Authority. So that's a new combined authority in the northeast of England. So we represent Newcastle, North Tyneside and Northumberland. And I lead on all of our digital infrastructure and smart cities work, and also our engagement with government around digital recovery as well.
Amazing, thank you very much. So without further ado, let's jump into the agenda for today. I've broken it down to 3 parts. Hopefully that will have some sort of structure to it. The first view is really to cover those topical points that perhaps people have been asking me about and asking various people involved in smart cities about. So we want to cover some of those first, and then we'll do a bit more of a deep dive in some of the technologies that are bubbling up and you know, coming to life in terms of smart city projects at the moment. So what I'd like to start with is focusing a bit on public transport and the impact of COVID-19 on public transport, and particularly in large cities like London, what the impact has been and perhaps how cities are responding to that challenge. Jeremy, if you don't mind taking that question.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Sandeep. So clearly there's already been a very significant impact, particularly on city centres, particularly for large cities like London, which rely on mass transit into the centre. And like many places, this is affecting those areas which are predominantly business districts in particular. And you know, the immediate reflection in terms of smart cities is that we're relying on drawing on a vast array of sources of data to reveal all the impacts on the city. And we are engaged in a big project measuring London's busyness at a quite granular level, which is really helpful. We've been able to observe, for instance, the impact of the Eat Out to Help Out scheme here in the UK. I think the other thing to note is that many cities are reliant on international transport as well. So London particularly reliant on international business and tourism, so the hit to aviation has had a consequent impact on the city centre. But whereas the city centre is still really suffering badly from the COVID crisis, some parts of the suburbs are starting to do better. Lots of people talking about rediscovering their local areas, the importance of their local parks. Their homes, of course, have become offices. Their high streets are now where they shop. The local amenities, cultural attractions being found or rediscovered. And to aid all that, the digital connectivity that we're now relying on all suddenly becomes much more important. Meetings become easier. We don't have to book meeting rooms. We don't have to tell reception. We don't have any meeting badges. We don't have to bring people up from reception. We don't have to rely on lifts. So accessibility of the workplace is much easier. I guess the risks of that is that we're very reliant on our devices, on our connectivity, as Paul just found a moment ago. And we need to make sure that we continue to invest in the underlying infrastructure and improve it, as we hope the 5G rollout will bring. I think the opportunities going forward will be to make that interaction between the physical and digital much closer, greater ubiquity of how we access digital services, so it's much easier and more intuitive. And I suspect that the office environment will start to be physically changed to work around how we now digitally connect in a way that we haven't done so much in the past. In terms of the kind of public transport impacts, I mean, we're still yet to see the full impact of the COVID crisis and what the new normal will look like, presumably once a vaccine program is successfully rolled out. We don't quite yet know what the spatial pattern of demand is going to look like, but I think we can probably deduce that the suburban and outer areas are going to become more important. There will be time released from people spending more time working at home, time that will be probably better spent in their local areas with their children, in local restaurants, cinemas, other places, rather than sitting on a train or in a bus. So those, I think, aspects of how the interaction between cities and public transport are quite interesting. We'll need to observe how they evolve over the next few months. And I think the only other point I want to make is that COVID has also shone a light on the huge inequalities that exist in many big cities in terms of people who have been affected by the crisis, both in terms of their health, but also economically. And I think that's another area where technology needs to play a role, both in terms of revealing the data, but also potentially in how we can address and mitigate those problems that have emerged. So I think those are some of the kind of agenda points that go beyond transport, but transport is one way of one expression of how cities change. So I'll leave it at that.
No, that's really helpful. So thank you for that. I mean, I want to bring Paul in here as well, Paul. I guess you've been doing quite a bit of thought, I understand, on bringing the public back and safety issues regarding getting the public back to using the cities again. Can you talk a bit about perhaps what some of the measures that you're looking at in Newcastle and I guess a wider area in the northeast, really? That's okay.
Yeah, I think to pick up on Jeremy's point there is this big thing around the future of a physical commute or the concept of a digital commute going forward. As we know that people will work totally differently in the future, this has given people a glimpse into maybe a different way of working in some areas. And it certainly did, as Jeremy suggests, point out a lot of the inequalities that we had in society. So things like making sure people have connectivity and making sure that people have devices so they can access healthcare, employment and education opportunities as soon as people couldn't visit public buildings. It shone a light on just how unequal a lot of our societies are. So that's where a lot of our thinking around getting people back into towns and cities came in, kind of making sure we get people back out, back access to those critical services, but also how do you then try and re-kickstart an economy after what we've just been through and what we are still going through and what we are still dealing with on a daily basis. And a lot of that we found was around putting information out to people. So how we use our smart city applications so that we can understand exactly what's going on in the city. How do we then push that information out to people so that they can then make informed decisions? So some examples of how we did that was we implemented machine vision across all of our CCTV estate. So within that, we could see real numbers of how many people were moving back into city centres, when they were moving back into city centres with a social distancing from one another. And that allowed us to do a couple of things. One was it allowed us to tailor our public health messaging that went out. So we could base that on these are things that are happening. We can see spikes in people returning into the city centres. And also we launched a service called How Busy is Toon. So on that, anyone can go on and it's just a website and it'll give just a simple traffic light indicator to say there is enough space in town for you to safely social distance. If it's starting to get busy, it'll turn to amber where it's looking like you can social distance currently, but we'd expect a rise in people. Or red where we already know there's too many people in town on the major shopping streets or in the car parks that mean that you can't social distance for everyone. So a lot of that was just about looking across all of our current smart city estate and looking at how much information we can push out to people so that then they can make informed decisions about whether they can safely come back into town, or not just whether they come back into town or don't come back into town, but how they can do that in a way that's at the right time and convenient for them, so that it gives some kind of confidence to people as well to start returning and knowing that they can return in a safe way.
And do you have any sort of trajectory of timelines or something regarding that, what you perceive to be happening over the next sort of 6 months?
We do. So we have a whole dashboard which is all open data that pulls in information from all of our smart city assets across the city. We've also done some work with MHCLG, and we were lucky to get some funding out of the latest round of funding to scale that solution up so that others could implement a similar solution as well. We see that and we are tracking that, and obviously we are comparing that against numbers rising in the area for infected cases. So we know what we are looking at in terms of how people are returning. We know the patterns, both in terms of traffic and people moving around, and what likely impact they are going to have on numbers rising of people being infected, and how we can then manage the numbers going forward to, as best we can, avoid a local lockdown by being proactive wherever possible. But then if we did end up in a local lockdown or a future lockdown going forward, we know that we could put out effective messages and manage people back into the city after that as well.
No, it's really interesting. It's certainly going to have some, when we talk about some lessons for some of the other councils later on, we can cover some of that. The next question, which is going to dovetail a bit into what Sarah is going to talk about, but just preempting that a little bit. Some thought around surveillance and use of data and public concerns around that. Is there any major thought you've given to that in Newcastle?
There is. We have an ethos of being open by default. So actually, citizens can see, they can look at all of the cameras that we have. So we have an open data website where they can see all of the cameras, they can see what's being recorded, they will get snapshots of those cameras. Also, we have the Urban Observatory in collaboration with Newcastle University, where they can see all of the footfall figures and everything. So really, we've took the approach of being really open and honest about what data we're collecting, and making that so the public can see all of the data that we're collecting as well. And we've actually seen, by doing that, because people can see what's happening and they can see why things are being collected, and we haven't seen a huge list of concerns. I think the other thing that we are starting to do really well is show how the things that we do and the data that we collect then inform decision making. So last year we, as part of the Great Exhibition of the North, we pedestrianised certain areas of the city, and we collected data around how those areas of the city were then being used when it was pedestrianised, what the impact was on air quality and things like that. And that then led into our planning policy for that street to be permanently pedestrianised. So by showing everyone what we're collecting, allowing them to see and interact with that data and them to use that data if they want to create solutions or just view it, but then also seeing how that flows through into action and change within their city, we've seen that people have engaged with that data rather than seeing it as a big brother exercise.
Yeah, no, really interesting, and I think that dovetails very nicely into I guess, Sarah, what you were going to talk about. So KPMG been very closely involved, I understand, and Sarah will tell us more with the Toronto Waterfront project. I know quite a few people asked about that, wanted that to be talked about today as well. So Sarah, I think you were going to talk something about some of the key lessons that we can probably take from the Waterfront project.
Yeah, I'm absolutely very happy to. To just, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, Waterfront Toronto, and in particular the Quayside development, I think is one of the most ambitious, most holistic smart city projects that I'm aware of. Basically a brownfield development that was going to be smart by design, digitally driven, and covering all the aspects of a smart city that you'd expect from transport, energy, construction, and also sustainable. So really high ambition. The planning was initially done by civic authorities, and then there's been a partnership, or was a partnership in place with Sidewalk Labs since about 2017. And many people will know that that partnership ended earlier this year with Sidewalk Labs indicating that the project was no longer economically viable. And I think there's some really interesting lessons from it, and in particular, just reflecting on what Paul has just said, one of the key challenges, I think, in that development as it was initiated was around the role of the private sector and the role of the public sector. I don't think the project is dead, by the way. I just think the delivery model will change. And I think the real killer issue for the project was actually trust. And that was public trust, in part in respect of what data would be collected and how it would be used and where it would be stored. But more widely, I think about what was the purpose of the project and the role of a single fairly large private sector player in it. So you have to look at the data side of it. People had privacy and surveillance questions, but they also had questions like, if I buy a home in this development and there's a data breach, what will be the value of my, how will that affect the value of my home, my ability to resell it, for example, or, you know, what would be done with that data? Maybe not, maybe anonymized, but is that benefiting me because it's my data? So we had Sidewalk Labs that's really excited about the prospect of a huge test bed, and rightly so. Well, citizens are a little more concerned that this is their private home, potentially, rather than just a test bed. And that leads me to another learning, which is I think there is an expectation that public authorities will take responsibility for setting the framework at a minimum within which a lot of this activity, the smart city activity, takes place. And I think in the case of Waterfront Toronto and Quayside, there was a lot of evolution of the thinking around that framework as discussions with Sidewalk Labs were ongoing and as the planning was ongoing. To a certain extent, in a fast-moving, innovative environment, that's natural. At the same time, I think that did undermine, in part, the economic viability, as well as the trust in the public authorities to actually put that framework in place in a way that would benefit citizens as much as it needed to. And that then also, I think, impacts the financing. So if you start to have a less certain environment for private sector innovation, in this case, actually, the scale of the project was initially reduced. That reduced the size of the test bed, reduced the applicability of what could happen from a Sidewalk Labs point of view. And so that, yes, it was economically challenged, but largely I would say because that public and private sector engagement wasn't happening in the way that it needed to early enough. And I think for me, that means, you know, as Paul's indicated, I think the public sector and government authorities shouldn't be too cautious about setting the rules of the game through codes of conduct, even if not through formal regulation. Shouldn't be too cautious about exercising their role, for example, in some of the data environment. And I think we do need early collaboration on design, including design of commercial models to allow smart cities investment and private sector investment to flourish.
That's really helpful. No, thank you for that. I don't know if any of the other panel have got a different view or want to add something to what Sarah said.
Yeah, I was just going to say, absolutely. You know, from the construction perspective, you know, we've certainly definitely seen that early engagement model has to happen for you to start to have, you know, any traction, any complete approach towards developing, you know, solutions within cities. So yes, absolutely. That without a doubt is a key element of delivering smart cities.
Oh, wonderful. So it's got a question coming through. I probably just want to see if we can answer. We've got a couple, but if we can just take one for now. It's talking around the issue of public trust in the responsible use of data shared, and thank Kirsty for this. And it's about how do we ensure the purpose and transparency is clearly communicated to the public to reassure them. So it's kind of that use of the data again that we talked about before. I know a few of you talked about the past. I mean, Sarah, do you want to take that, or does someone else feel that they've got some view on that?
Yeah, I'll just say something briefly and then let others jump in. But I do think that data, first of all, data we tend to treat in a kind of just general blob and call it data. And actually, when we start to think about smart cities, there are lots of different kinds of data that have different risks attaching to them and have different connections to individuals or companies and different requirements on them. And I think as a whole, we need to be a lot more sophisticated about how we think about that. I also think that we need to be more cognizant that simply anonymizing data does not actually remove some of the privacy issues, and in particular when people start to talk about the uses of data, whether that be onward for other innovation, which might be productive, might be public, might be proprietary, or also how we think about that in terms of the sales process, right, and the aggregation of that data by other players for other purposes. And I think we probably don't have an environment quite yet where that is as transparent as it needs and well understood as it needs to be. But I'll happy to take other views.
Hi, this is Yelena. If I could just add something around the communication of what data is being used for. We've done a preliminary piece of user research together with Sidewalk Labs when they were still involved in the Toronto Waterfront project. And what they were looking into is visual icons that would be used to communicate to the public what exactly was being collected by various sensors, who would own the data, who would have access to the data, what it might be used for. And the idea was that this didn't go to kind of full fruition, but the idea in a prototype was that they would be able to scan a QR code that was on a lamppost, for instance, or on a bench or something in the public realm. And that QR code would then take them to a website which would explain, we are collecting footfall data, or we are collecting air quality data. So it would explain what was collected, whether it was anonymized, personal, etc., who would be able to use it. So that was something which they have been exploring as one method of being more transparent to the public. But again, I don't think that went through to full implementation because they have now come out of the project. But it's an interesting thing which others might pick up. And also they were hoping that this would become a more broadly used standard rather than just something that Sidewalk Labs would use. So they did take into account quite a lot of feedback from around the world. And hopefully we will see some more of this kind of transparency within the public realm.
That's wonderful. Look, thanks very much for that, Elena. Just moving on, just in the interest of time, Kirsty, hopefully that answers some of the questions that you had. I see there's another question coming through, and we'll take that if we've got time towards the end, if that's okay. Just want to sort of move on to Yewande now. Yewande comes from the construction industry, and I guess what we're looking at, Yewande, if you don't mind, is talking a bit about the challenges and key thought process in the construction industry now. I know we talked a bit about smart cities previous conversation. I know you were very keen on that collaboration side of things as a key theme as well. But if you could just give a perspective to everyone around the sort of key thought process and challenges in the construction industry now, that would be really helpful.
Thank you very much. And really just to follow on from Sarah and Yelena as well, and our previous panelist, I guess I always like to ask myself the question, you know, what is the why? And if you ask that question, right, you know, I'm really trying to understand the context of smart cities in different countries, in different regions, you often kind of find that you're coming to a slightly different answer as a bespoke solution to those areas. So I'd say if I use, you know, two cities, for example, you know, you think about London and you know, the drive for smart buildings, certainly, you know, 5-10 years ago was really around ensuring that there were, you know, that our building stock considered climate change, that it considered energy consumption. It was really around developing a range of new building stock that was good for the environment. And then you think of cities like Shanghai, for example, where there is a massive commercial stroke retail drive experience as well, where smart buildings have had a massive focus on user engagement, being able to understand how people occupy the spaces. When people come into retail spaces, how do they move around in those spaces? What do they go for? And those two different approaches have designed and drafted, they've been the core of the approaches to communicating with people in those cities, communicating with the designers, communicating with the delivery partners, and really getting a message out there. So where the construction company comes in my view, is where delivery partners, you know, there needs to be that brief that reflects what the city wants, that reflects what is good for the people, what is good for the environment. And that initial brief is a collaborative effort, you know, really between the design consultants, right? The investors, the clients, government, people like, you know, masters, you know, system integrators, and ourselves, the construction delivery partners as such. And what we're able to do is really to take that brief, you know, and work with that brief, providing that there's that, you know, collaborative approach. One thing I really hate to do on my projects is value engineer out, you know, smart city or smart building components. And once there's that agreement, which, going back to Sarah's point, right, it is embedded in trust. It's embedded in a different approach to the tender process, because we can't really, you know, develop all these solutions based on our traditional tender processes. The clients need to understand the value in ensuring that their building is occupied and experienced in a slightly different way. Right, so I would say that is the main challenge, really getting that cohesive approach, helping the clients to understand that, yes, it might not make you, you know, it might not be the cheapest solution, but if you look at the long-term value to your building, to your people's experience, to the user experience, you know, it is the right way to go. The construction industry is rising up to the challenge. Over the last 10 years, whilst we've been trying to work with design consultants in various projects, and, you know, some example projects are the likes of the Francis Crick Institute in London. There's the Specialist Critical Care Centre in Wales as well, where we've worked to provide the baseline infrastructure for, you know, to enable intelligent buildings. So smart building is one thing, you know, having all the IP infrastructure there. But I guess, you know, the next conversation is how intelligent is the building, you know, and that is where you start to use the data to feed back into the building and feed back into the user experience. So we work towards ensuring that you have all the baseline infrastructure, you know, being able to connect to IP, being able to ensure that you understand, you know, what the heating and ventilation systems need to be, how you can regulate them, how you can use less water, how you can achieve less water consumption, in the buildings. Now, moving forward, I would say collaboration needs to happen. I would say, challenging our methods of, procurement needs to happen as well. And I would say as well, early engagement, absolutely. Working with the design consultants, with the investors stroke clients very, very early on and getting their buy-in.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that. That's extremely helpful and gives us a really good perspective. I think we've moved away now from the topical side of things. I want to go a bit more into the technology. And we had a really clever question come through from Hans, actually, which, David, I think might sit in your shop. It's around how the IP should be owned and commercialized in smart cities. So if you don't mind percolating on that, and we'll come back to that a bit later. But I think it's a really interesting question. I think if we can talk now a bit about the AI and the emerging technology we're seeing right now, and probably perhaps just have a bit of a conversation between three of you, really. I think, Larissa, if you don't mind starting, and Yelena and David, if you don't mind popping in as well as we start talking a bit about it. But really, we're trying to understand a bit more about what the most promising smart city technologies that we're actually seeing come out at the moment, what's being used so far, and what can we expect. Larissa, over to you.
Thank you, Sandeep. I would just make a few comments about some of the things that I have heard so far. So on the topic of trust, I think trust should not be something that we do. It should be a consequence of what we do. We shouldn't put effort into getting the trust. And I think we also have to understand that privacy means different things to different people. And I remember coming across projects that they thought, okay, this is going to be enough for the population, but that is the big problem of the bell curve. We have the bell curve and then we squash it in such a way that we aggregate everyone, we try to aggregate every single person, that we lose the sense of what it means to different people. And that is the biggest problem that we have when we design solutions for smart cities and make this a commodity that will serve just a privileged few. And I think that also one of the things that we have to take into account when we develop and apply technology is that it should not violate any human rights and should not perpetuate any unfair bias, which is some of the things that we see as in today. And especially talking about AI and ML, one of the things that is not much clear that people should be educated a lot on this is on one side, we have people giving their data and receiving services, and they have to understand what their services are for, and the explainability, the explanation of why certain services and certain answers were given to them. And the people developing the technology, they have to have the full understanding of the mathematics behind that solution, because we are not talking about traditional software engineering here. We are not coding rules. We are not saying if someone has a fever, then do something. The problem with AI, the data will drive the behavior of the system. So if you have an outlier in your data set, your model will degrade in production, will go south, and you're going to start having problems. So it's all about like the data that we input into the system. So that's why humans, they have to be part of the data processing to enable us to make use of this emerging technology. And I think we are living at a time of unprecedented opportunities, because we have everybody connected now, everybody part of the internet, like, because sometimes people, they were not part. And the good thing about the internet is that it's distributed, it is dynamic, no one owns the internet. We only have one owner on the internet, if we can call owner, that is the company that issues the IP addresses, and all the rest, like, it's dynamic, it's free, and people can go and scrutinize the systems as we go alongside. And one of the problems that I see about this aggregation of things and make the data about people, about privacy, about trust to disappear is, for instance, I have an example that about blind people. Blind people, they do not, they have a lot of issues about finding the bus stop. And that is like, we have 285 million people who are visually impaired, and they have a problem with finding the bus stop. And GPS is not very good for micro navigation. And one of the things that we are seeing is that technology, we have all the technology we need, it's out there. We have phones, we have everything that is very cheap for us to buy. However, we have to also make sure that humans are a part of the data processing. There's a project in Boston called Blindways, and this project, what it does, that it uses humans to record. I'm walking on the street alongside the recording of like any GPS system the user is using, and recording, give 2 steps, now turn to your right, and then give 2 steps and then stop. That is the bus stop, because the blind person will go forward and the bus will just go nearly run them over and will not stop for them. But that is the problem, though, that some people, they thought, okay, this app, I use a GPS, anyone can find where the bus stop is and stop. But that is the problem. Blind people, they cannot make use of that because GPS is not good for micro navigation. So we have to come up with something different. And all the technology is there. We are going to have a shortage of 2.3 million doctors, and 70% of the people are going to be living in cities. And that creates a huge demand for us to have those doctors. And we have technology around for this. So there's a solution called Proximie. And what they do is they use a simple tablet. For a doctor carry a single tablet with augmented reality software installed in it. And then they can hold this on their desk and see the image of like someone maybe in Bolivia who is not trained for a particular surgery. And the doctor, just by using the camera of the tablet, can make sure like, okay, you cut over here, you cut over there, by seeing the image. And that augmented reality application is transmitted over and superimposed to what the other doctor on the other side of the planet is saying. And this is the Internet of Skills, is how we can get our skills over here and make use of augmented reality and mixed reality so the other people, they can benefit. And then we help one another. And especially in COVID-19, that is one of the technologies that can help us to ensure we can transfer knowledge from doctors who are specialized on a particular care to others that are in other parts of the globe without receiving any of that solution. So I think all the technology is around there. We have to be careful about the bell curve and about excluding people, and be mindful about the trust and the privacy, because when people know that the beneficial to the social side outweighs any risks, they're more willing to give and donate their data and to trust into the system. But the social benefit has to outweigh and not violate human rights, nor perpetuate any unfair bias. So I will leave it there.
No. Thank you very much, and I really love those real life sort of examples that you gave as well. So thank you very much for that. That brings it to life for people. Elena, I know you had some examples you wanted to give of technologies coming through that you're seeing as part of your work. If you don't mind giving a few moments on that, please.
Yes, sure. I'd like to mention 2 examples. Also, just to say, Dr. Suzuki, my husband actually works for Proximie, so I'm very familiar with their offering. Interesting to hear them have a mention. The 2 examples that I wanted to share, one is a global one, primarily formed by business, and the other one is an academic one, primarily focused within the UK. So the first is the Emergent Alliance, and this is a not-for-profit collaboration of global organizations. This was only founded in March, and it was founded as a direct response to the COVID crisis. And these group of companies have come together to inform decision-making on industry and on regional and global challenges due to the crisis, and to try and aid social recovery by drawing on expertise not only of its organization members, but they also have a big group of volunteers who work together with them on processing the data. So some of these organizations include the big kind of players, IBM, Microsoft, Google, and some of them are smaller UK companies. You may have heard of IOTIX, and they're quite big players in the digital twin space here in the UK. So they've got around 60 members, which are formed up of business. They've got around 100 members, which are volunteers, and they've got 5 live projects which are on the go and looking at COVID-specific responses. So that is an interesting one, which illustrates how quickly organizations and businesses have actually jumped to be able to work across barriers and across boundaries. I mean, some of these are usually competitors with each other. IBM, Google, and Microsoft compete in the cloud space, but they've actually decided to come together to try and share knowledge, share data, and overcome some of the challenges that COVID has presented. So that's one good example. And the other one is actually from the Royal Society. So they have brought together a group of academics and others to feed into something called Rapid Assistance in Modeling the Pandemic, which is shortened to RAMP. And that is using, so the Royal Society has huge levels of convening power, and they have brought together everybody. They've had around 2,000 responses when they called for volunteers, and many teams who've offered to help with data modeling. So actually Connected Places Catapult was one of the organizations selected to participate in this initiative. And our team of data scientists have been working towards understanding movement within small spaces. So that could be schools, that could be offices, that could be train stations, looking at how people move. So Paul, you alluded to some of these things with your local authority as well. How can we safely allow people to come back to work, to safely use train stations and go back to school? Something which is probably quite topical for many people this week. So that's an interesting academic approach in contrast to the business approach shared by the other one.
That's wonderful, and it's good to see some of the interesting work that the Catapult's getting involved in as well. So thank you for that, Elena. David, what to pass over to you now. I guess there's a number of areas, and I think just looking at time as well, I was just wondering whether we capture quite a few of them. So I think we were going to talk a bit about what you've seen again coming through, particularly in terms of R&D, etc. But yeah, if you want to talk a bit about that and your view of some of those technologies first, David, then we can move from there.
Sure, and I can try and address the question about IP as well to be as efficient as possible. So Innovate as a funding model provides what is essentially a replacement for R&D funding that is usually provided at a larger corporate level. So we are agnostic about the size of organization that we fund, but our resources are much more relatively valuable for smaller organizations. And I think one of the challenges with IP in an area like smart cities that is inherently integrative is that if you're collaborating as a small entity with a much larger entity, it's harder to hold on to that IP and to maintain that legal independence or that technological independence. So Innovate's role as a funder and investor, I think, helps to preserve that ability of smaller, more nimble, newer firms to develop their own IP that can be applied in a smart cities context. And some examples of firms that we have supported recently that are in the smart city space and are particularly responsive to the pandemic are firms like Vivacity, which people may have heard of, that have an optical sensor that is able to differentiate different mobility types, different modal types. And it was intended to be used as a to work at intersections, to look at the traffic flows. And it has been adapted because of social distancing needs to look at the proximity of pedestrians and of other travelers in more public spaces. And other things that we've seen are, for example, paratransit services that are traditionally taking passengers on journeys being repurposed to provide freight journeys for PPE or other essential medical equipment. So apologies for trying to compress a bunch of different thoughts into a single speech, but I think there's a couple of examples of technologies and solutions that we're seeing evolve during the pandemic.
Amazing. Thank you very much for that. I think just to finalize on the technology side of things, I think, Jeremy, I think you were going to talk a bit about sort of digital twins and the part they're playing in city government's futures and how it's being utilised at the moment. Don't know if you could say a few words about that. That's okay.
Yeah, sure, Sandy. And it's really interesting hearing the description of some of the technologies that the crisis has spawned. We have a sort of a view of the digital twin market, which is that it does need to be led by the public policy questions or issues or concerns that city authorities really need to address. So to give you a few examples of quite cutting edge tools that we've helped sponsor and create in City Hall, they all emerge because of a particular problem that we really needed a technological solution for, rather than a kind of all singing, all dancing digital replica of the city that we might or might not actually want or use. So the first one is the observation that we have within the crowded urban area that is London lots of utility companies that are often digging up the streets. How can we better coordinate those works so that we have a dig once only approach? And that over some years led to the creation of an infrastructure mapping application that looks to the medium term. We're drawing data from the utility companies, and for the first time we can start spotting where they're likely to be constructing at the same time in the same place, often 1-2 years ahead. This relies on good data, a good data flow, a good relationships with the companies themselves, given that they also are competing. They're privatized, they are regulated, but they're private companies, they're not public authorities. So that's one. Another one would be thinking about where crime takes place in the capital. Clearly we have data from the police, but actually you can get really interesting data about the incidence of crime from the emergency services or from hospital admissions and from a whole myriad array of organisations working on the ground. And again, we've started to map where that's all happening. And finally, I guess a very recent example, we've seen the push towards having more electric cars, and we're now starting to map with all the local authorities where the electric charging points are, where the demand is, and starting to also think about the energy supply implications in terms of when people tend to plug their cars in, which itself builds on some other energy modelling that we've done. As these are some sort of more public policy focused digital twins. We also have planning models, 3D models of the city. But the observations are we built them to answer specific questions for which technology provides an answer, an efficient answer. Few existed maybe 5-6 years ago. They've really only sort of spawned a lot in the last 2 or 3 years. There's a massive need for communication, interoperability, and particularly intelligent interrogation of the data. Otherwise, they won't really work. And I think that is why we see digital twins as being a really nice, easy to get concept, but actually making them work in the real world and enabling an impact on the future is really hard graft.
Yeah, no, that's exactly the same feedback. So we work with the company Third Eye in this space, which is kind of where my interest lies. And same thing is that interoperability that they're finding they have issues with. People aren't quite ready for that and have it all integrated together with the platform. So thank you very much for that. We are sort of moving out of time, and so that's my fault as a moderator. But there's a couple of key points I did want to touch upon. One is covering a bit more about the data side of things, and how important data is in understanding some of the key things in building sustainable cities. I think, Sarah, you were going to say a couple of words on that. We are running out of time, so if we could keep that quite short, so apologies for that. And I think
yeah, happy to, and I'll be quick actually, because I think what Jeremy just said about interoperability really resonates, and how complex it is to achieve that. I wanted to say a few words about the BUS Open Data platform, which I think is a really good example of the kind of thing that needs to be led by government in order to allow all of the benefits that we're talking about, including a flourishing of a private market. So basically, a single project to get onto a single platform, all of the UK's bus related data, from schedules, timetables, fares, eventually to where is my bus. You'd think it would be simple, but it is a massively complicated problem. And so when you think over 50% of public transport trips pre-COVID were made by bus, those are predominantly lower income, younger, older people with accessibility issues. And we know that ridership is massively affected by lack of information. So getting that data out there is a real, I think, tech enabler, and it should provide a basis for huge growth in other apps, right? So you could imagine it linking to bus stop accessibility, to some of the micro mobility that's just been discussed, to bus capacity information, to scheduling changes for COVID. The exciting piece from my point of view is actually then linking back to those changes in patterns of demand that I think Jeremy referred to at the very beginning of this call. how do we then start to link public and shared private transport in a way that is more efficient, more responsive, and meets the needs of more people? And I think that is a really quite transformative promise in terms of people-centered cities and people-centered transport.
That's wonderful. And I would say to the audience as well, if there is certain areas you want to know more about, because we are having to rush a bit, please get in contact, and we'll certainly try to get that information through to you or connect you to the relevant person on the panel. Yelena, I did want you to jump in here with, again, I know we're running out of time, but I think it's quite important. You had a few relevant use cases from some of the councils here that I think you were going to talk about. Have we still got Yelena?
Yes, sorry, I just unmuted. Yeah, so we have a couple of examples of local authorities who are quite innovative actually in their use of data for decision making. And one which I'd like to mention is the Borough of Barking and Dagenham, and they use different data sets, and they've put together something called the Social Progress Index. And this looks at various things like around well-being, and I think they've actually included it, expanded it to include more data sets. And this is a publicly available section on their website where people can go and see how things have either improved or deteriorated within their ward. So it's a ward by ward analysis of various services that are provided by the council. And this is something really interesting. They also have a visualization tool that goes together with the these statistics. So it's a really nice way of using data to make decisions and allowing constituents in their borough to see exactly where funding is going, what's improving, what's not. So that's a great example of using data to inform decision making. We see quite a big disparity across local authorities within the UK, who some are quite advanced in terms of data-driven decision making, and some are still kind of on the roadmap towards getting there in reality. But the Barking and Dagenham one is an interesting example. If anyone wants to have a look, if you search for Social Progress Index, you can see further information around that.
Amazing. Thank you very much for that. And thanks for keeping it brief and helping me, because I didn't organise it as well as I could have done. So thank you for that. We had a good feedback on the infrastructure mapping tool with IMA from Matthew. So telling us it's a fantastic tool. So I think maybe that's for you, Jeremy, too, as feedback. And I think just moving on now to the next step, I think just we're sort of closing up now, so I think we're back on track really. I wanted, Paul, if you don't mind, I mean, Paul, you won, I guess Newcastle won the Smart City of the Year last year. Just being interested to understand a bit more about what you're planning, some of the learnings for some of the other councils.
Yeah, I think the good thing about that is there's one word that's came out in everything that everyone said, and that's collaboration. And certainly for us winning the award last year, collaboration was key, in that just smart council services in their own right are great, but they don't make a smart city. And actually the award was more recognition of the whole city. So it was about our collaboration with universities, our business district partners, our invest partners, the private sector investing in the city. And certainly we are really blessed with having some great resources in the Northeast. So in Newcastle alone, we have the National Innovation Centres for data, for intelligent aging, and for connected construction. So a lot of that was about how we use those and how we collaborate with those, so that actually we get a much bigger benefit, and the city is a smart asset in its own right, not just a smart council. And I think our plans going forward are how we continue to grow on that. So how we continue to support our thriving tech sector to bring new products and services to market, how we put more sensors out and create more data for people to use, and not just ourselves, but other partners in the city to continue to improve, and how we work with the public as well. So how we make the city responsive to what the public want and what the public need from a city, and how we can be much more dynamic in how we manage the city. Certainly in response to COVID, we all had this vision of dynamically managed cities, and I don't think either of us, any of us, saw that would be on an hour by hour basis on how many people are in certain parts of the city. That certainly accelerated a lot of our plans, but we see that as a key catalyst that we'll continue to improve on and work on going forward.
No, it's amazing. David, just to finish off as well, I think you were going to talk a bit about the converse, really, what's holding back local authorities in this space as well, and what's stopping some of these smart city technologies moving forward. If you don't mind, just sort of finish off on that, that would be great.
Sure. I think we have identified that some of the things holding back more smart city initiatives are the obvious things like funding, particularly on a more decentralized basis. But I think the thornier issues are things like procurement and administrative models. So cities technically often struggle to procure new services that don't have a pre-existing track record, and or the beneficiary of a particular investment is not necessarily the one who's the budget holder within the city administration. And both of those things are we try to address as an institution through programs like SBRI, which is a long acronym I won't take time to explain because it's not useful anyways, but it's a way to let cities procure innovative services through companies that we fund. So I think that is particularly difficult. And the final thing I'll say on smart cities that I think is looking to the future is what cities are not so good at yet, but will become better at, is pricing infrastructure. And I think that's a direction that we're heading towards. And getting that pricing model right, irrespective of the service across all sectors, I think that is a barrier that we're currently overcoming.
Absolutely brilliant. And on that note, I think we're at 2 o'clock, so I'm just going to wrap up now. Firstly, to say I can't believe how much we've covered off in 1 hour. I mean, you could have done this all day, couldn't we, really? So thank you very much for trying to keep as brief as possible. To the audience, I'd say thanks for staying with us. Hopefully you found it really useful. This is recorded, and I believe, Larissa, we're going to post this on the TLA YouTube channel as well, aren't we? So look forward to that, but I think we'll send it out to yourselves anyway. If you have any particular questions you want to follow up on, I know there's 2 or 3 I couldn't get to, so apologies for that. I will pass it over to the relevant panelists and hopefully they can come back to you with an answer. With that, I'd like to thank the panel very, very much for their expert views. I really enjoyed it and hopefully the audience did too. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.